In 1912, thousands of people gathered at the port of Southampton to watch the RMS Titanic depart. Looking up at its massive hull from the docks, it looked like a floating city. Over 2,200 people climbed aboard for that maiden voyage. The passenger list spanned the entire social spectrum, from the richest millionaires on Earth enjoying unimaginable luxury to working-class immigrants carrying their entire lives in small suitcases. Newspapers of the day confidently labeled the vessel unsinkable. The public largely accepted this as fact, treating the ship as a permanent, immortal piece of engineering. This widespread belief in the ship's absolute perfection was the true beginning of the disaster. Late into the night of April 14th, the weather over the Atlantic was dangerously calm. There was no wind, no breaking waves, and the air temperature was freezing. Several nearby ships sent direct warnings about massive ice fields ahead. The Titanic's crew received these messages, yet they maintained top speed through the pitch-black ocean. Slowing down would mean acknowledging a threat to the ship's perfect image and schedule. This same focus on appearances dictated safety protocol. The ship was heavily under-equipped with lifeboats, simply because the designers felt too many wooden boats would clutter the elegant, sweeping lines of the passenger decks. At 11:40 p.m., a mountain of ice appeared directly ahead. The crew tried to turn, but the ship was too heavy and moving too fast. There was no explosive crash. Many passengers barely noticed the quiet scrape along the hull. Up on the decks, people continued their evening without interruption. But down below, the freezing ocean was already violently tearing open multiple compartments. Deep in the lowest levels of the ship, reality was immediate. Icy water silently and rapidly flooded the forward sections, rising higher by the minute. The ship's chief designer, Thomas Andrews, went down into the belly of the vessel to inspect the damage himself. Looking at the breached hull, Andrews did the math. The water would fill the front compartments, pulling the heavy bow downward, which would cause water to spill over the internal walls into the next compartment, and the next. He calculated they had less than 3 hours before the entire ship went under. As far as the laws of physics were concerned, the ship was already dead. But in the warmth and light of the upper decks, that reality remained completely invisible. The orchestra played to keep the mood light, while passengers continued to drink and socialize. Some even laughed at the idea that they needed to evacuate. When the crew finally managed to lower the first lifeboats, many went down half empty. Passengers simply refused to trade a brilliantly lit ship for a tiny rowboat in the middle of a freezing black ocean. Eventually, the tilt of the deck became impossible to ignore. As the bow dipped deeper, icy black water surged into the interior, finally reaching the ornate wood and glass of the grand staircase. Complete panic exploded across the decks. The horrific math of the situation was suddenly undeniable. There were over 2,000 people on board, and nowhere near enough lifeboats to hold them. With a severe shortage of seats, women and children were forced into the boats first. In seconds, families were torn apart. Husbands stood in the freezing wind, watching their wives and children disappear into the dark waters below. That period of hesitation, fueled by a total lack of urgency, wasted the few survival options they actually had. It transformed a mechanical failure into a mass casualty event. By 2:20 a.m., the ocean swallowed the lower decks entirely. The massive ship strained under the weight, and the electrical lights flickered out, plunging everything into total darkness. The sheer stress on the metal hull became catastrophic. The ship violently snapped in two. Within minutes, both halves vanished permanently beneath the surface. Over 1,500 people were left stranded in the open ocean. The water temperature was well below freezing. In conditions that severe, survival was measured in minutes. After hours of screeching metal, chaotic crowds, and sheer panic, the Atlantic Ocean eventually returned to absolute chilling silence. Hours later, the rescue ship RMS Carpathia arrived to pull the few shivering survivors out of the water. Looking down, the sight of those scattered lifeboats made the scale of the tragedy clear. So few made it out. For decades, the wreck sat undiscovered. It wasn't until 1985 that explorers finally located the remains, resting nearly 13,000 feet deep in the abyss. Down there, the ship is broken and covered in rust. Scattered in the mud are personal belongings, like leather shoes frozen in time, serving as ghosts of a society that vanished in a single night. We remain endlessly fascinated by the Titanic over a century later because it stands as a permanent, physical monument to human error. It proves that the deadliest disasters rarely begin with a sudden, violent impact. They begin the exact moment we let arrogance